Welcome back to my YouTube channel, everybody. I'm joined today by former homicide detective for LAPD, Greg Kading, who led the task force which investigated the murder of rapper Christopher Wallace, better known as the Notorious BIG, who was killed in a drive-by shooting in 1997. Thanks for your time, Greg. Thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you for making the effort to get a hold of me, and it's nice to talk to you from such a distance.
Oh, yes, it is. It is. This communication systems makes distance so short that we can actually talk to one another in two different continents. So let me start by asking you something very basic. Why was a task force started to investigate the death of the Notorious B.I.G.?
The task force was assembled because there was a lawsuit pending against the city of Los Angeles and against the LAPD. And that lawsuit was based on allegations that LAPD officers had either been involved in the murder of Biggie Smalls or they had participated in a cover-up. And so the department was trying to just, really get to the bottom of these allegations. The allegations were being pursued by Biggie Smalls' mother and his ex-wife, Faith Evans. And so it was the two of them that had become convinced that there was some, nefarious activities. So they had a lawyer, pursue this lawsuit. And that lawsuit is what caused the police department to go, hey, we really need to get to the bottom of this. Let's investigate all these different theories and see what we can come up with.
When did you guys understand and how that the murder of Biggie Smalls, which is another name for the Notorious B.I.G., was connected to the murder of Tupac Shakur in Las Vegas?
Most everybody that was paying attention to either of these two murders or to both of the murders speculated or suspected that these murders were kind of connected. There was so much rivalry going back and forth between the two record labels, Death Row Records and Bad Boy Records, and so much rivalry going on between the artists and so much rivalry going on between the CEOs, Suge Knight and Puffy Combs. Everybody just assumed, that there was going to be some connection. And there had been so many events that preceded Tupac Shakur's murder in Las Vegas that also would have provided the motive. And that's typically where you start with in a murder investigation, is like, who would have had the motive to do this?
Well, can you explain us what led you guys to conclude that Poochie, who was a gangster and also an associate of Suge Knight's, was the shooter in Biggie's murder?
We eventually contacted one of Suge Knight's baby mamas, the mother of one of his children, who had a very close and criminal relationship with Suge Knight. What I mean is that she was involved in a lot of white-collar crimes related to financial activity at Death Row, and she had a long history of her own fraud and perjury, that type of thing. We eventually got a hold of her, and she was in very concerning situation where she didn't want to go to jail and lose her kids. And so she said that she would sit down and talk to us and tell us what she knew. And once we opened up that door, she explained that Suge had gotten a hold of her, asked her to get a hold of Poochie and offer Poochie money to kill Notorious B.I.G. So once now we had a criminal conspirator that was confessing to her own involvement in the murder. And then we just began to kind of confirm the information that she was providing.
And how many false leads did you guys encounter in your investigation? Because, for instance, I remember in your documentary, you guys saying that you were misled by a lot of people being blamed just for the fact of owning a dark Chevrolet Impala, because let's remind our viewers that the shooter was riding in a dark Chevrolet Impala. So just let me rephrase my question. How many false leads did you guys investigate and encounter?
There were just dozens and dozens, and I probably would be safe to say that there were hundreds. There were so many different stories being told, and so many different pieces of information coming in, and people were calling in and confessing, and then we would find out that that person's in a mental institution. That we had to go through the process of pursuing all of these different clues and leads, and they were an enormous amount of them.
Now, you mentioned already that Suge Knight had a role in this murder. So what role did he have? Was he paying? Did he pay Poochie for shooting Biggie Smalls, and why?
He ultimately did. He arranged to have money transferred so that it could get to the female and his girlfriend, and she delivered the money to Poochie on more than one occasion, because there was more than one payment. And of course, the motive for Suge Knight was retaliation for what had happened to Tupac Shakur just 6 months earlier in Las Vegas, when Tupac was shot and killed, and then Suge Knight was sitting in the car next to him. And so it's just retaliation, really, against Biggie, because rumors had spread after Tupac had been shot. Rumors had spread that Biggie Smalls had been in Las Vegas that night, that he had hired the gang members who ultimately shot and killed Tupac, and that Christopher Wallace, Biggie Smalls, had provided the gun that was used. So these rumors began to spread, and that is why Biggie was ultimately targeted and killed himself in retaliation. All those rumors, by the way, were false. Biggie was not in Las Vegas. He did not hire these Crip gang members, and he did not provide the gun. So unfortunately, he got killed for bad information.
Well, you guys also had a former girlfriend of Suge Knight's, who's known by the alias of Teresa Swan, read a fake confession by Poochie that stated that he had done shootings at Suge's orders in the past as well. This is pretty peculiar. Can you tell us something about this episode?
Yeah, well, we're always looking for ways to help people come clean. And oftentimes, because people know what the consequences of their cooperation can be, or they're afraid of their own, implicating themselves. And so, you have to go through all of these different possible scenarios to try to get people to open up and to be honest about what they know. And so, hold on one second here.
No problem.
Hey, Donna, can you bring me a charger? The one that's over in the corner. Sorry about this.
No problem.
I'm not sure why my battery's getting eaten up so quick these days. I just charged this thing. And so the long one. And so I lost my train of thought, and I apologize for that.
No worries. You want me to re-ask the question?
Please.
Can you tell us something about the episode when you had a former girlfriend of Suge Knight's read a fake confession by Poochie?
Yes. So we ended up, sitting around with the other task force members and speaking about how to best help this very reluctant, well, at first we thought would be a witness, but ultimately turned out to be a co-conspirator. She was extremely afraid. She was afraid to cooperate. She was afraid to snitch out on, Suge Knight. So we just had to kind of help her. So psychologically, we know that oftentimes when we have suspects in custody, or we're interviewing and interrogating somebody, if they think that somebody else already spilled the beans, or somebody else already had confessed, it takes some of the burden off their shoulders of being the first one to kind of, open the door. And so we thought if we could convince her that somebody else who was involved in the murder had already confessed, it would give her a little bit of comfort of knowing, well, she's not the one to ultimately snitch out on Suge Knight, or rat out Suge Knight. So that was kind of the process of it all.
Well, at the very beginning of this interview, you mentioned, without quoting the name of the person, that theory by Russell Poole, who investigated this case before you guys, according to which the two murderers of Notorious BIG were LAPD officers, a guy called David Mack and a friend of his called Amir Muhammad, and that corrupted policemen were part of the conspiracy. I understand that you guys debunked this, but generally speaking, what are your thoughts about this theory after so many years?
Well, it was a viable theory to the extent that it needed to be pursued and looked into. It was built on a lot of bad information. I mean, ultimately, we discovered that all of the foundation of that theory had been built on lies. And once we were able to prove that the foundation of the theory was invalid, then everything that follows automatically becomes invalid. And so that was it. We figured, you know, the person who provided the initial information about Amir Mohammed admitted that he had lied about it all. He was a clinically diagnosed schizophrenic who was not on his medications and had lied about a whole bunch of other stuff. And so ultimately, when he confessed to his deceit, we knew that that theory wasn't going to hold any water. But nonetheless, a lot was done to just, you know, to over investigate whether or not that could be true. And every time we turned around, all of it just continued to fall apart as a viable theory. Bill Russell Poole himself left the department prematurely out of frustration. And, you know, he was struggling from some of his own issues. And I think that he had just found himself to be at odds with the LAPD, and then went down this rabbit hole of this theory. And unfortunately, it caused a lot of confusion. It cost Valletta Wallace a lot of money and time, and she was pursuing a false theory. So it was really just an unfortunate thing for everybody.
But this theory is still pretty popular. It keeps coming back. Is it because of the movie with Johnny Depp or some other reason? What do you think?
Well, it's good entertainment. I mean, it's a salacious theory, and a lot of people who are mistrusting of government, mistrusting of law enforcement, mistrusting of the LAPD, they'll hold on to that because it fits their presuppositions. It fits their, you know, preconceived notions. Because if you think that way, if you think, well, yeah, this is, cops are bad, cops, you know, go out and target, you know, this wasn't a racial issue because both David Mack and Amir Mohammed were black. So it was never really a racial issue, but it was one where people think that, you know, law enforcement is corrupt. And so therefore it feeds their preconceived notions. And so they accept it as a truth. And it's a more entertaining theory. It's a more entertaining theory to think that dirty cops went through all this trouble and the department covered it up. And that's a better story than, hey, some gangsters just retaliated because of another shooting. That's just gangster 101. That's just, there's nothing interesting about that because it happens all the time.
Well, let me ask you something that just came to my mind. You said that the Notorious BIG was not involved in Tupac's shooting, and that's something I understand and I agree with. But Tupac was killed at order of Bad Boys Records. Am I mistaken?
Well, I think that that's a nuanced statement. You have to understand the situation that Puffy Combs was in. He was in fear for his life. He knew that Suge Knight and Suge Knight's gangster associates were all targeting Puffy. Puffy liked to come to California. Puffy enjoyed Los Angeles, and he knew he had a target on his back. And so out of that desperation and that fear, he makes this, you know, reckless assertion to these gang members like, hey, I'll do anything if you take care of this problem for me, you know, take care of Suge Knight, take care of Tupac. And so that's what led to those gangsters taking it. You know, of course, one of them gets beaten up by Tupac, which really fueled the situation. I mean, that beating of Orlando Anderson by Tupac and Suge Knight and the rest of those blood gang members, that's really what caused the murder. But there was already this standing idea that Puffy Combs wanted these guys eliminated too. And so that's when the gangsters were like, hey, we'll kill two birds with one stone. We're going to retaliate no matter what because one of our homeboys just got beat up. But then there's this other thing where we can make some money at the same time because Puffy wants this done. But again, I think Puffy's just speaking out of complete desperation. He's speaking out of fear. I don't think he really means for anybody to go out and assassinate and kill anybody else. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Yes, I understand. So it was out of frustration and he had to take fast decisions. It probably was misunderstood. Definitely makes sense. How useful was the investigation of your task force in saving the city of Los Angeles from having to pay the fine required by Wallace's mother?
Well, once we had this co-conspirator confessing to her role And after we determined that it was truthful information, that information was then shared with the lawyers representing Mrs. Wallace, Biggie's mom. And of course, they know, their whole lawsuit had been falling apart for years. I mean, they were having to reinvent it and reinvent it and reinvent it over and over because it kept falling apart on them. Well, now this was the nail in the coffin when we can go into court and go, hey, we've proven that there's no evidence to support this theory that that the lawsuit's based on, but we do have solid evidence to prove a different theory. And so that is why they retracted their lawsuit. They realized there's no more sense in throwing good money after bad. And so they retracted the lawsuit and the whole thing just went away.
Well, your description is so precise that it leaves me with one unanswered question. How come no charges were filed against anyone at the conclusion of your investigation?
The investigation that we conducted was concluded 2009, late 2009. Both Poochie and Orlando Anderson, the individual who shot and killed Tupac, and Poochie, who shot Biggie, they were both dead by then. They had already been killed in unrelated gang activity. Poochie had been shot 10 times in the back by a rival blood, and Orlando Anderson had been shot and killed by rival drug dealers. So they were dead already, so you can't really prosecute them. So this really ultimately leaves Suge Knight, the female that was cooperating and gave us all this information. She ended up getting an immunity agreement, and then this just left Suge Knight. But the prosecutors in Los Angeles, said, hey, how practical is this to try to pursue, where we have one witness who happens to be the mother of one of the children of the suspect, and she's got her own criminal history that's going to discredit her on the witness stand. You can't really prove a case where you have a female that's in a direct relationship with your suspect who has her own credibility issues and hope to really win that case. So unfortunately, that's just, who's the best way to understand this, and the one who said this was actually Valletta Wallace's attorney, who said these are not unsolved crimes, they're unprosecuted crimes. And that is because of the difficulty with all of the different, just the issues and the variables that are involved.
Well, Greg, I think you spread some light on these two cases tonight, so this was very helpful. So thanks for your explanations. Thanks for being with me today. Thanks for accepting my invitation. Thanks everybody else for watching this, and see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, buddy.